this video. Okay, perfect. Well, people are pouring in. Okay, I think it's time to start. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us this evening for another Architecture Forum event, this time on Modern Architecture in Post-Colonial Morocco by Lahbib El-Moumni and Emad Dahmani from Association MAMA, Mémoire des Architectes Modernes Marocains. I would like to begin by introducing our speakers. Lahbib El-Moumni is an architect and professor at the School of Architecture in Casablanca. In 2016, he and fellow architect Emad Dahmani founded Association MAMA to highlight the built heritage of Morocco from the last 15 years of the Protectorate through 1980. The work of MAMA includes researching and archiving architectural heritage of this period, as well as raising awareness of it through conferences, workshops, exhibitions, and seminars on the architecture, art, and history of modern Morocco. Emad Dahmani graduated from the School of Architecture in Casablanca in 2015, and his first professional experience was in Paris and Architecture Studio in 2016. Upon his return to Morocco, he joined MAG Architecture in Casablanca and opened his office ADA in 2021. He's the co-founder of MAMA and currently teaches at the School of Architecture in Casablanca. And on that note, I would like to invite our speakers to begin. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much, all the team of Yale, for the invitation, and we're very humbled to share with you some of the work and some of also the experience that we had a few years ago. We're trying to highlight in Moroccan architecture and specifically modern architecture. So I'm joined with Emad Dahmani. So as you said, we founded MAMA, the Association for the Preservation of the Heritage Modern Architecture in 2016. So let's get to it. I'm not going to be so long. I hope you will get a piece of what is Moroccan modern architecture. But most importantly, we can discuss afterwards about a lot of things. We just tried actually to summarize a bit. We just tried to give you some shots, let's say, give you a taste of what is actually modern architecture in Morocco and what we're talking about, specifically in that period of post-colonialism and post-independence, let's say, after independence of Morocco. So you will hear two voices, my voice and the voice of Emad. So let's get to it. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, do you see my screen, right? Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, all good. So let's just start with this big giant map showing Morocco, which is part, of course, of Africa. The situation of Morocco as a country in the north of Africa, very close to Europe. And this is very important because at some point it will influence a lot how Morocco is today. Morocco was colonized by two countries, by France and Spain. in 1912. And so what is interesting, okay, let me see if I can hide this because I think you can see it. Okay, good. So when you Google Moroccan architecture, this is what you get. Basically, you get more of the Moorish architecture, you get more of the traditional architecture. Of course, this architecture has a long history. It backs from like more than 1,000 years. And what is interesting is that still this is the very important part that Morocco preserve and that Morocco try to highlight outside. And basically, even in American movies, a lot of times, this is what we see, actually. This is what we see. We see the Marrakesh. Even a lot of people know Marrakesh and they don't know Morocco because of that big, giant tourism part in that city. But this is how we actually end up trying to highlight another architecture, which is really very modern, that is not very preserved in Morocco. Let's get you back a bit in 1914 with this image that's showing the map that's showing actually the aerial view of Casablanca in 1916 already. And this is the birth of modernism in Morocco, with this big city that's going to be constructed massively with buildings that are very interesting in a new ways and also with new materials. And this is not just in Casablanca, but also in other cities, like in Marrakesh, for example, and also in Fez. So those are like some cities that are today big cities in Morocco. When we're talking about big cities in Morocco, we're not talking the American scale, let's say. Like, for example, Casablanca, it's something around 5 to 6 million inhabitants. But this is big in terms of cities in Africa. Casablanca is one of the biggest cities in Africa. What is the type of architecture that was done in the 30s and the 20s? This is the type of architecture, a very minimalist Art Deco architecture, of course, that is based on geometry, that is based on a lot of details that are very interesting. And what is important here is the fact of using the traditional, let's say, masterpieces and traditional way of doing buildings, as we actually include a lot of details of Moroccan architecture. This is the image of today. As you can see, the stonework, very interestingly done, and very and inspired, of course, as I told you, by this Moroccan traditional architecture. Like, for example, the stonework that you see in the facade here in the State Bank was inspired by the stonework done in the Kutubia that was built between 1120 and 1196. Some interesting details of steelwork and also the copper work as well. And what is interesting here is the fact of using these materials, this kind of connection with what was done before the protectorate, before the coming of the French. A lot of buildings are very interesting. I'm not going to be more in details, but I will show this building that is one of the most let's say, beautifully skilled done in Art Deco of Morocco. This building, when you go to the archives, you see these beautiful drawings with a lot of interesting details, but still here, we're all talking about, let's say, l'Arabisance. We are talking about architecture that is very connected to the Orientalism kind of work. As we use a lot of details and still we are stuck into the use of arcades and so on. Those are some details of the drawings of the doors and also the windows. And of course, at some point, modernity came in Casablanca in much more bold way, let's say. This is the highest building in Africa when it was built in 1949 by a Swiss architect, Leonard Morandi. This building is 17 stores, 17 floors. And what is interesting about it is that it has already all the most comfortable kind of use of it. Like, for example, here, when you see the publicity of this building, they're saying this building with a beautiful panoramic view. So with seven elevators, I mean, they're showing all this luxury of those buildings. And this is not new in Casablanca, because in Casablanca already in 1930, we have a lot of buildings with elevators already. And this is really something very avant-gardist, let's say. So one of the most important periods in this modern architecture is, of course, the fact that Casablanca and Morocco was part of the Siam of North Africa. And here you can see that Michel Cochard, the urbanist who came in Casablanca, he showed these diagrams in Siam 9 in 1953 in Aix-en-Provence. And what's interesting here is the maps and also the drawings and also the diagrams showing the problems that faces Morocco at that time, which is basically the problems of people coming to big cities to work, and then they don't find where to live, and they just start building slums. And this is how Casablanca started at some point in a very peripheral part of it. And here you can see the grid with a lot of photos and a lot of pictures, and also a lot of drawings and aerial views. And what is interesting is that at that time, Casablanca and Morocco were showing to the world via the Siam that we are not exhibiting modern architecture with white facades and beautiful closed houses and so on and so on, but we're showing a huge problematic that we should solve, which is how to build a housing very quickly, and they respect the climate, and also they respect the culture of the people. And here you can see an image where you can see at left the patio houses in the Medina, the medieval Medina, built in like 1,200 years now in Fez. And on your right, you can see the proposition that was done in Casablanca, which is basically inspiration from that patio and courtyard houses done in a very, let's say, grid way. And it was even said that it was even called the grid of Ecochar. So here you can see a picture. So in the front of the picture, you can see the buildings like a stamp. All of the houses were actually ground floor, and then you can see in your right, in this part, you can see more of the slums that was actually replaced. Everyone, I mean, it was replaced by the time. And of course, one thing interesting is the fact of experimentation of different, let's say, forms of buildings. And here, this is the most famous experiment in Casablanca that was done in the 50s. It's called the building Nida Bey. So this building was even the cover of L'Architecture d'Aujourd'hui, which is one of the most famous magazines at the time. Of course, these experiments started and also continued even after the independence of Morocco. But here I'm showing another example by Swiss architects, again, in Sidi Othman, which is a peripheral part in Casablanca. And you can see here the really beautiful kind of superposition, also the composition of those blocks getting all together and creating a vertical kind of courtyards. And of course, there was also a lot of experiments like this one, a huge slab of building with different shapes and forms. What is interesting is that the education of Moroccan architects and also foreign architects were basically at the time studying at one of the famous architects. Like, for example, a lot of architects that I will show you later on, their projects, they've been the students of Auguste Perret, for example. And Auguste Perret was here in Casablanca in the early of the Protectorate of France in 1914, where he actually built and tried a lot of vaults like this. And you can see here the drawing of the first vaults that are very thick, very thin in terms of how the forms are. And here you can see like the thickness, it's just 7 centimeters. I don't know how much, because I'm talking centimeters and maybe you will not understand me. Maybe someone would translate it into inch, but this is very interesting in how a lot of experiments in Casablanca allowed lot of architects, like for example, Oscar Niemeyer, to do much more big vaults with interesting shapes in concrete. And that's how we call Casablanca an open air experiment lab. Of course, one of other architects is that influenced the Moroccan architect who came in is of course Jean Prouvé or Jean Boudoin, and all of them, of course, and Marcelos, all of them, they came at some point to build in Casablanca or build in Morocco in general. Like this is the town hall in Agadir that was built at the time, and you can see the pictures before the earthquake of that city. So here you can see in 1951, this massive building done by the collaboration of two geniuses at that time, Marcelos, the architect, and Vladimir Budyonsky, and the engineer. So this is the picture of the architect who actually stayed in Morocco, who actually built in Morocco before independence and stayed in Morocco after independence. Some of them, like for example, Jean-François Zevaco and Ila Zaguri, they were born in Casablanca, Louis Riou as well. Some of them here are Moroccan. The only Moroccan architect here is Ila Zaguri, who actually started building in Casablanca. He studied in Les Beaux-Arts in the 30s, and he actually graduated and came to Morocco in 1947. So this is the chapter that I'm going to go through more interesting stuff now, which is basically what was done after the independence. So here I'm showing you this book by Udo Kulturman, New Architecture in Africa, and you can see that he highlights one of the most interesting buildings I found in Morocco. This building is still here, is still standing. This is the Rehabilitation Center of Tit Moulin in Casablanca, built between 1953 and 1960. You can see the let's say that the building at some point want to just fly from the ground. This really form that excites actually Jean-François Zevaco a lot in his buildings. And you can see, of course, the same, let's say, vocabulary in one of the most iconic buildings that was unfortunately demolished in the 60s. This building, which was actually the entry pavilion, the entry Moroccan pavilion of the International Fair Center in Casablanca in 1960. And this building, as a reversed pyramid, was even a model for Oscar Niemeyer. I mean, the model, I mean, Oscar Niemeyer couldn't actually build that museum in Caracas in 1954. We have only this picture that's showing the model. But in Casablanca, Zevaco actually built a reverse pyramid. And this is only to say to you that all of the architects in Morocco were very connected to what was happening in the world. And this is very obvious at some point. Of course, thanks to the magazines, and of course, also thanks to the literature available in the libraries. Jean-François Zevaco is one of the most famous architects in Morocco of that time. And here you can see a report from Morocco by the journalist George Everett Kiddersmith, who actually came to Morocco, did a huge, let's say, trip, and at some point ended up in Casablanca, this big city, and he didn't find actually much interesting buildings. As you can see here, he talked about it as Casablanca is much of the rest is an architectural couscous. I mean, he's actually saying that actually all the Moroccan architecture in Casablanca is a kind of a lot of mixed. But one of the most interesting buildings that he found is one of the buildings of Zevaco. And by hazard, this house captured the eye of that journalist, which is actually the Villa Suissa built in Casablanca between 1947 and 1949. As I told you, a lot of publicity also of those buildings built in Morocco was done and was covered by Architecture d'Aujourd'hui, was covered also by the American magazines. And this is how Moroccan architecture was exported to the world as well. And of course, a lot of things were imported and were actually inspired by the architect in Morocco. When you see this villa, for instance, this is very close to Notre houses, to Notre kind of shapes of villas and houses in California style. And here you can see that Yale did this villa in 1952, which really get a lot of inspiration from that architecture of Notre. This is his house and studio in Casablanca, brutalist architecture, of course. Very interesting shapes came into life. And in Morocco is very particular because here in Morocco we have, let's say, 9 months of the sun. So basically there's a lot of sun and we have to be covered from the sun. So all the buildings are kind of trying to not get very open, but more play with the composition of the concrete and also white slabs to make a really interesting facade profile. This is the interior view of the house. A lot of materials were used, and basically the most important ones were concrete, raw concrete, and wood. Same architect did a lot of schools, primary schools, basically. And here you can see this beautiful interior of the school that is still existing. Zevaco, on the other hand, did a very spectacular. He's always playing with the forms of pillars. He's always playing with the forms of the walls and also the roofs. And here you can see that roof that is at some point suspended in the air. And this is how Zevaco always was very genius into that. And these images that I'm showing to you, a lot of them were shot by an amazing photographer named Marc Lacroix, and he helped a lot Zevaco in exposing and exhibiting his work worldwide. In the drawings, this is what I told you. A lot of drawings, a lot of details of pillars in different shapes and forms. Some of the buildings were, let's say, modest in a way, but very generally interesting in terms of the vocabulary that we've been used here. You can see the claustra, you can see how we are not going to open a glass facade, but more getting these small, tiny glass bricks to get as much light as we want, but at the same time to be covered from getting a lot of sun inside the house and inside the building. Here, this is the post office in Casablanca. It's the same thing and it's much more, let's say, frequent is in Ouarzazate. Ouarzazate is a region in the south of Morocco, and Ouarzazate is something around 39, sometimes 40 degrees in the summer. So we really have to play and have to consider the climate when we do architecture. And this is exactly what those architects did at that time, which is really trying to understand the climate, trying to understand the culture and work with it. And here you can see the panels that are covering up a huge empty space out inside the school. You can see the composition, you can see how the windows are very tiny, small, but still here we are in a very interesting composition, very modern composition with alignments, also with the let's say proportions of Le Corbusier works and so on and so on. This is the state of the building today. Well, we will talk a lot about it maybe in the questions of the state of those buildings. I'm showing you now only a lot of pictures of the early state of the building, but today there's a lot of things to do to save those buildings. Here is one of the most interesting buildings as well, this transmitter center in Safi, and you can see that it looks like a piece of paper, not really a roof actually on that building. So at that time in the 60s, Morocco gained his independence in 1956. So right after 1956, a lot of things have to be done, especially a lot of housing and of course a lot of equipment and a lot of infrastructure to be built. This is one of the biggest challenges in Casablanca at that time, which is building for the slums still. And here you can see Hay Hassani, a master plan done by Ilyas Zakuri and his team. And this huge dwelling and huge operation of housing was done between 1957 and 1960 with a lot of different propositions of programs. It starts with big slabs and also with housing. Remember the first housing that I showed you about Eco Shop, the ones in only ground floor? Here, Azaguri actually did let's say a variant, did let's say a second version of it, which is basically building from the beginning 2 or 3 floors at the time, because he already actually saw in 1950 already that all those ground floor houses were actually built above of them, and people now they are having like 4 or even 5 floors on those basically ground floor houses. This is the image of one of the let's say the piazzas, one of the squares that the people can join and come together at some point and play. And still until today, it's really a beautiful playground for kids, and they're still very protected because they are very close to their houses, but still they can play football or whatever in that square. So after all these experiences, Morocco really had to come in a huge, let's say, speed of construction, because we have a lot of people coming from the rural areas to the cities, and we have to build for them housing, and also we have to build infrastructure. We have to build a lot of faculties, universities, we have to build hospitals. All of this was done, 80% of it, in that period of the post-colonial period, and it has to be done only by a small team of architects. Let's say that we, at the time in the 60s, we had something around 15 to 20 architects, all of them, and all of these 15 and to 20 architects had to build actually Morocco in a way. So all of these faces that you see here, they have built all over Morocco, from the north to the south. They have done actually building. They built actually houses. They built infrastructure. They built everything. And the average number of projects built by these architects is something around 300. Like, for example, Abslam Farawi and Patrice de Mazière, that you can see here in the picture in the middle, in the center, they have built, only for them, they have built more than 200 buildings in their career from 1960 to 1980 to 1990. So let's cover it up. The first biggest challenge was, of course, this huge earthquake of Agadir. I'm passing, maybe Hamad will talk about it.
So in the 60s, after the independence of Morocco, a huge an event, a sad event that was in Agadir. So the earthquake in 29 February in 1960s. And unfortunately, 80% of the city was demolished through this earthquake, and generating nearly 50,000 victims. Here in the plan, you can see in the red marks all the demolished buildings of the city, and you can see that nearly everything was demolished in the seismic zone. So the new administration of Morocco decided to rebuild urgently a new Agadir. But just a mark, Le Corbusier in this event came actually to Morocco to discuss with the late King Hassan II about his vision about Agadir and how he can build with the Moroccan administration a new Agadir that was built with the Chart Athènes zoning regulation that we all know of Le Corbusier's urbanism, but it was unfortunately not well received from the Moroccan administration, because it was maybe too harsh, too rough, to build a modern, radical city like Corbusier envisioned it. But at the same time, he see that in Morocco, we have a new generation of modern architects that actually was inspired by this modernity of Le Corbusier and can actually capable of build this new Agadir. So here in this plan, you can see a schematic, the first schematic plans, and what we can see from this plan is that this architect was adopting this Chart Athènes idea and party from the zoning parts. So you can see at the ocean, you have all the leisure equipment, administration, habitat, and industry. So the city was organized around different function, but at the same time, they thought about integrating the human part from pedestrian walks and also making all the green spaces that came from around Agadir through the city coming along the beach. So here you can see some aerial view in the 60s of the reconstruction. So the reconstruction began urgently in the 60s, like in the November 1960, and the nearly all the biggest equipment was built from the 60 to 65. Here you can see some examples of modernist buildings like Habitat here, different buildings of different architects that Habib talked about. So you can see that this generation built a new city, but was really inspired by this new style of architecture that was called brutalism. So you can see here the structure was revealed with raw concrete. The building was really strong, but at the same time also it was this idea of showing the people that run from the earthquake and they have to rebuild and to be in Agadir, that the building is strong because the structure was shown and is really strong and solid, so people can really live in this new city. So here you can see some archive from these buildings, and you can see this really detailed building of the projects. So you can see the structures, you can see all this collective effort that the buildings and the architects made through this era. So here the immeuble A, the famous buildings, it was like a horizontal buildings of 150 meters long, and it was really inspired by this idea of building and living in a slab, in like building habitat. And you can see this new modernity of Agadir that was really radical at some point in Morocco. Here another buildings is the Courtyard houses in Agadir by Jean-Francois Zevaco, and this building was awarded the Aga Khan Award in 1980s. And what is interesting about this building, it was like really inspired from this idea of culture and the idea how we can reinterpret the idea of patios and idea of viewing the horizontal grid that Habib showed you of Ecochar grid in Casablanca. But here in Agadir, Zevaco was really renovating in another way. So here you can see each house has 5 patios and was really organized around this idea of gardens and the luxury of modest people in this place.
And still, it was very connected to the world, as we said. And here you can see the magazine of architectural record, where there's an article about this housing. And here you can see the title, Search for Contemporary Use of Traditional Language. This was really the theme at that time in the 60s and 70s and along to the 80s. It was very important, this search of identity, this search of how we can be at the same time modern, but we still have our own identity in those buildings.
Yeah, here's this photo of Zevako receiving the Aga Khan Prize in 1980. He's in the left, on the far left. And you can see there is some really interesting building here. Another building of Zevako, this is the firehouse station in Agadir. You can see this building around circle buildings, and was marked by this tower of concrete. Is the plan. And what is interesting about Zevako that he was really drawing all his technical drawings. I don't know, but in this era it's difficult to really draw the foundation, the details, and everything. And Zevako was really interested in drawing all different aspects of the building, from the general idea to the minus details. Other pictures. There's the tower, but at the same time there are a lot of other architects that was also the architect Claude Verdugo who made a market hall in Agadir, and you can see in this market it was like this biggest between the biggest halls that was constructed by pillars of concrete, but at the same time mixed by this steel triangle steel of envelope that cover the whole market. Another project like here you can see a German architect that came in Morocco, in Agadir at the time, and built this beautiful mosque. You can see the mosque really this pure white volume, and in the interior you can see this feeling of spirituality. You can see this roof that was built in raw concrete, and also the columns that was really sculptural, and because they were split in four little columns, and in the background you can see this light coming from the roof. So the modernity has really strong, but they can also be inspired in other equipment like in mosques. Another building, Elias Aguri, who built here the Administrative Courthouse. You can see here the interior hall, between the mix of raw concrete, but also a brick glass that come in through natural light from the outside. And here in Rabat, it was between Agadir and Rabat, it was the two strongest cities that built all the style of brutalism in Morocco.
I mean, this period of Agadir was a big challenge for Moroccan architects, but it was also a big exercise of how we can build with concrete, with raw concrete. And so those same architects who built Agadir, they also were building at the same time in other cities in Morocco. So basically they were doing the same type of architecture also in other cities, even if they were hit by the earthquake. And also we can talk about the fact that also the entrepreneurs and the contractors were allowed to do this, and were actually also experienced into doing this. And Agadir was a really huge experiment land to how to use concrete, how to frame it, how to build it, and also how to give it a lot of aspects. And this is a really beautiful picture from above the Faculty of Medicine in Rabat, where you can see the volumes of the amphitheaters, and the other form that's connected the amphitheaters is actually the hallway. Here you can see another detail of the library part, and inside the library always this use of concrete and this use of white slabs, but also this use of wood and the use of natural materials in the architecture. So let's go to Fez, and you can see the same architect who did the hospital that we showed. They also did this Faculty of Science in Fez, and this is a really beautiful building today, It was really well maintained, and you can see the pictures of these pictures were taken 4 years ago, and you can see the white blocks, brute blocks, and the inside the amphitheater is really interesting. I mean, when we just got inside the amphitheater, the first thing that came to our mind is, of course, the Lou Kahn building in the Exeter Library in New Hampshire. So it's really interesting, this connection between all the architects and the inspiration coming from abroad. Another building, another Institute of Journalism in Rabat by the same architects. And afterwards, what's interesting, and this is the last part of our presentation, is the fact that Morocco also was connected to one thing very important to its own existence, which is tourism. A large part of Moroccan economy is based on tourism. And so in the 70s, there was this politic of really trying to improve tourism in Morocco. And so the National Office of Tourism, they launched a huge project plan in Lower Morocco, which is basically building hotels in all the regions that have beautiful landscape to attract tourists, and specifically foreign tourists. Here you can see the map of Morocco with all the dots. Those are the cities where these architects, Abdeslam Farawi and Patrice de Mazères, they will build hotels in them. Let's start with this hotel that is. It's actually a beautiful comparison with the traditional architecture that I showed you from the first slide that I talked about, which is really the connection between the traditional aspects of the buildings. Because at some point, those buildings that were done without architects, they were respecting the climate more than the architecture that is done today. And what is interesting about those architects, they try to actually learn from the lessons of those buildings. Here you can see the compact volume of the hotel, and in your left you can see one of the major buildings in Moroccan architecture, which is the Qasbat Ibn Haddo in Ouarzazate, that was done completely with clay. Here you can see a zoom in the composition, and here you can see a zoom in the composition of old houses that are today not inhabited. And it's really interesting to see the connection between these architects. From the inside, here you can see, of course, the buildings were not constructed in clay, because at that time, in the 70s, there was not those techniques of doing big architecture with clay, but still they build it in concrete, but they try to not cover it up, but they start actually to mix between the clay and also concrete. Here you can see from the inside lobby how the wooden closed and how the sofas, everything was drawn by this architect. Nothing was actually left to chance. Here you can see a composition also between a kind of collaboration between architects and artists. Here the panels, the wooden panels that you see here, were done by the first artists in Morocco in the period of 1960. That was called L'École de Casa, a group of artists who started doing abstractive art in Morocco, which was not allowed before the independence. Here you can see a beautiful picture of the swimming pool area of that hotel that is called Hotel Intomart. Here, same thing. You can see the landscape really in the background. You can see the building shapely, very naturally getting into the landscape, and not really having like these big concrete blocks come into a city where actually you can see them as foreigners. Here, the architecture really matches the landscape of the existence. From the inside, we can still use a lot of details that are actually contemporary at that time. And all of the details you see here, the chandeliers, the carpet, the claustra, all of them were actually designed by artists. And those architects, Farawi de Mazères, they were the first architects to include Moroccan artists in their work. And this is the last picture that I'm going to show you. And it shows actually resumes in a way how Moroccan modern architecture is and how we can identify it. Moroccan architecture is the use of natural materials, is the use of culture in the building, and also is the respect of the landscape, and also the harmony between all of these elements in modernity. Thank you so much. I hope I was not that long.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. And I think if any of our guests have any questions, please. You can either unmute yourself and ask, or you can put it in the chat, or because I can't really see raise hands, I guess. We have a question from Kevin Gray. Who were the clients for these buildings? Was it the government or our industries?
Both, actually. There was a lot of buildings where actually the contractors or the clients were the government. And also a lot of clients were private as well, especially in those houses that I showed you, the villas and so on, the small houses, Californian houses kind of way. They are done by for the private clients, but all of the building that I showed you of the infrastructure, the hotels, the hospitals and so on, all of them, they were done for the government of Morocco.
Great. We also have another question. Do you have any books to recommend regarding bibliography, perhaps?
Well, this is where Mama came in, actually, because we don't have a lot of books on this. So we are trying to do some of them. I think the only book that talks a bit about the modern architecture of the period of the protectorate, basically, is the book by Jean-Louis Cohen that is called Casablanca, Mythe et figure d'une aventure urbaine. I can write it down. But actually, it's a book that is really interesting, but mostly for the period to understand how architecture of Art Deco started in Morocco, basically in Casablanca. And it's very focused on Casa and very focused on the period between 1912 and 1950. So our idea, I mean, what we are trying to do here now is actually to get more and more literature and get more publications on this architecture of post-colonial Morocco. We have already published some of them. You can see in our websites the first publication that we did, which is called Modern Map of Casablanca. I'm going to maybe show it to you later, but in our website, you can see the publication and also all of the publications that we did. I mean, there are 3 now, and we have a huge project. But let me get it to surprise. Maybe in 1 year we will have it.
There's also another different, like what you said, Habiba, in the 60s, all the culturemen who published 2 books, but discuss about modern architecture in Africa in general. But he reserved some chapters to Morocco. So you have like a new direction in architecture in Africa, and the second one is the one you showed with new architecture.
But I think also there's a lot of works being done by young architects today. A lot of them, they are interested into all this architecture, and a lot of them, they're doing their theses on them. So I think we have a big chance that this new generation will get more and more talk about this architecture.
Excellent. Craig, if you would like to go.
Just
Okay.
a quick question, and thanks to both of you for giving such a succinct and crash course in at least one trajectory through Moroccan modern architecture. Fantastic. I wanted to take up your suggestion, Labib, about the challenges of preservation, which you alluded to at one point in the talk, and just to hear you guys say a little bit more about the problem of archives and of building knowledge itself of the history of modern architecture in Morocco, because so much of the material you shared with us is in fact material that you had to work to bring together, because there's no immediate repository for so much of this stuff. So if you could just share a little bit and reflect a little bit on the challenges, not only of defining what modern architecture means in Morocco, but of constituting an archive for being able to research it in the first place.
Yeah, actually, it's a very interesting question, because I think if it was easy, maybe Mama would have never been born, maybe, because the first thing that we saw, I mean, when we graduated from our school, we were taught that modern architecture is always connected to Europe, and the only modernity is in Europe, is not in Morocco. This is how we were taught. And also we were taught much more than that. We were taught that modern architecture started when we had France came in, and it stopped when French got out. So basically we were wondering what happened and what is the link. And of course, when we start digging in, the first thing, we didn't find a lot of archives. And this is the huge part of the work that we do, which is really looking into archives, trying to get architects, trying to get families of those architects, to get the pictures from them, to get plans from them. And we started in 2017, we started a huge trip in Morocco, in which actually we did cover and taking photos, a lot of buildings that were completely abandoned. We didn't know about them. And actually there was a publication on our website of that. It's called Mama Trip Discoveries. It's free. You can actually download it and you can do the tour yourself in Morocco. But most importantly, what is very hard to do in Morocco is the fact that those buildings that I showed you today, all of them, they're not listed. All of them, they're not heritage, they're not national heritage. So basically, we're talking today, maybe tomorrow, all of those buildings could be demolished and no one would say nothing, because nothing actually protect them. And to protect those buildings, you have to show them, you have to highlight them, you have to get them that value, and you have to also express the information and also to share the information with the authorities and with the people themselves. And this is a huge gap we have. I still remember just like 4 months ago, we went to launch a dossier on the inscription, I mean, the registration of one of the building as a national heritage. And those guys, when they took, I mean, the cultural, the Ministry of Culture, when they took our dossier, they were like, okay, you want to register this building? How old is it? I mean, for them to be registered, it has to be like 1,000 years old. So when we talk about architecture of 1970, it's not old enough. It's not important enough to be preserved. So this is the huge gap that we try to fill. And I mean, with our modest contribution, we are doing a small progress, because we are trying to teach this to students, to our students. This was not done in our period. So now we are doing it more. And I think also we have a lot of friends that are here, and I'm going to say hello to them, who are actually junior architects, graduated from different schools in the world, in France, in Morocco as well. And they have as their thesis work some of the architects or some of the fields. Like I would maybe define Tifout. She's here. She's working on Mediterranean architecture, and specifically what was done as hotels in the Mediterranean part of Morocco. And she did a really beautiful work on her thesis, and she's still doing actually a PhD on that now. Hello, Tifout. So yes, so I think it's we have a long way to go, but let's hope to get it. And I think today is a big recompense for us, because I think 5 years ago, no one would have thought that we will be doing a lecture in Yale or doing a
Yeah.
lecture in MIT or Harvard or whatever. So today we're doing it because we are speaking out. We are trying to get the word out. And this is very important, I think.
Thank you so much. We have one more question from Yassir. You defined the elements of Moroccan architecture in the 70s at the end of your talk. What would be the modernist or traditional elements defining today's Moroccan modernist architecture?
I think this is the trick. When you talk about traditional, the thing is modern architecture in Morocco, it has to take in consideration the tradition, because at some point the tradition of doing modern architecture is basically because when we use like the when we used in the, let's say 1,000 years ago, when we used the courtyards, when we used the patios, for example, we did that not just for aesthetics. We did it because we need a temperature inside the house that would allow us to live comfortably. And to do that, we needed actually to be closed from the outside, but to open from the inside with a small fountain. Like, these are the traditions we're talking about. We're not talking about ornamentation. We're not talking about the aesthetics of the buildings and just trying to mimetize this. So we're talking about understanding how people build their houses, to try to do it in a modern way today with new materials maybe. And the use of materials is very important here, because we cannot use whatever material we need, because architecture today in Casablanca, in this climate, it's a crime to do a glass house, completely glass house. It's a crime actually, because inside you're gonna die. You're gonna die like with hardness, so it's very important to understand this, I think.
I think also that there is a great debate today about sustainability and passive buildings and everything. But when you see these buildings at their era, they were really avant-gardist in their times, because they were thinking about things that nowadays we are thinking about, like the ventilation, like the orientation of buildings, like building with local materials, buildings not using technology of heating and cooling and everything. And I think that what is important about this period that we can really relate, if you can see, like in other different parts of the world, like Spain or Portugal or maybe Japan, they have this strong school of thinking, and they learn from the history to keep our history, our tradition, how we build in our climate and our region, but at the same time following the needs of this the new society, the contemporary society. And I think there is the challenge of this young contemporary Moroccan architecture.
Okay, maybe we go to the next question.
Yes, I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
And, sorry. In your opinion, how important is it to preserve architectural heritage? Why should we keep fighting to preserve our Moroccan architectural heritage?
How important to preserve history. I mean, we cannot know where to go if we don't know our own history. So that summarizes, I think. It's very important to know where we come from, so we can know what we want and what we want to do. And I think preserving the heritage is the most important thing to do as architects today. And we have to protect those, because we have to speak out a bit on it. Because if we don't do it as Moroccan architect, it will just like go in a vape. And I think it's very important. It's one of the biggest missions I have as an architect, I think.
Also, it's a part of our history, like in all the historical architecture of Morocco. We have a lot of books and theory about traditional architecture of Morocco and everything. But in this 30 years or 40 years of the modern movement, we don't have anything, because these architects were busy to build Morocco. And that's why our main goal is to document. Even it's difficult, like Greg, you said, it's difficult to find archives, but from time to time, we see that we have contacts with a lot of students that have new materials, some new researchers that really go deep in this area to understand the building. So I think it's important to preserve this history of the Morocco, because it's a part of Morocco, and we cannot really make it like it not exists at all.
Well, great. Thank you very much. I want to thank both Lahbib and Ahmad for joining us this evening and sharing your amazing work on this topic with us. We have quite a lot of questions still for you, and it will be good if we can share your contacts, and if there is a perhaps a bibliography you would like to share with the with our guests, we can do that afterwards. But anyways, thank you so much, and again for joining us. And this event was not possible without the support of this Yale School of Architecture and History of Art Department. So great, and my colleagues Eddie and Alan. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much. See you very soon.
Thank you very much.
You can contact us. We just left our email. So
yeah.
So anybody who's coming to Morocco, you can contact us. If you have any questions, you can contact us. If you just want to say hi, you can contact us as well. Thank you very much and have a pleasant day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.